Alright, in this video I'm going to attempt to describe the swiping technique with words. Now, this is not a new technique. This has been around for a while. I just posted a link to a Charles Eaton video that was made 13 years ago on the subject of hard hammer stones and the way you can make flakes with a hard hammer stone that resembles soft hammer. Okay? But in that video, he demonstrates the technique well, but the technique can be extended to soft hammer or even pressure. Okay? You don't need to use only hard hammer. You can use soft hammer, which could be stone soft hammer, or you can use antler or wood soft hammer. Wood might not work as well. It has to be fairly resilient in order to achieve the effect of the swiping. Okay, so now I've been using the swiping technique on and off in almost every video, right? But not primarily as a thinning technique. I've been using it mainly as a edge dressing when I'm swiping the edge with a hammerstone, just shaving it down, getting rid of the delicate areas. I use the swiping technique to remove very small, very thin flakes so as to not modify the contour of the edge very much, just enough to knock off the delicate areas, right? So the objective would be, since it doesn't modify the edge very much, it's still going to grab onto the percussor, especially with soft hammer percussors. They will grab the edge and peel a flake off. Swiping is a totally different concept. When you prepare an edge for swiping, what you are doing when you are grinding or abrading is presenting a surface that has very little friction. It's almost the opposite of an edge that is used for the other type of percussion, which requires an edge that grabs the tool. This edge preparation, when used with swiping, is not supposed to grab the tool. So the abrading is a totally different objective with swiping than it is with the other types. With gouging, I call it gouging, or with smashing, or whatever you want to call it. Now, the reason why I haven't gone over this before in the past is because I wasn't coherent enough to give you a good explanation on the distinctions between the two basic techniques. There's overall techniques. There's the gouging technique, and then there's a swiping technique. I really didn't understand all the nuances, and I wasn't able in my mind to separate the two clearly. But now I can, to a certain extent, and I'll get better at it as I get better at the technique itself. I'll get better at explaining it. Okay. So to reiterate what's going on here, we'll take what appears to be, identical bifaces, right? You need to prepare these for percussion because we're dealing with percussion. So how do you prepare these? Well, for the normal type of percussion where you're actually hitting the surface of your biface, you have to make sure this area is not delicate. So what you do is you modify the edge by striking this way to remove a flake like this. You turn it over, strike, remove a flake like that, so that you have a surface that is good for contact when percussing. That way you cause a bulb of percussion initiation on the platform itself, and this requires accuracy to produce this particular type. Right there, everything requires accuracy, but this one especially requires accuracy in knowing how to hit the platform. And when dealing with percussion and the lack of accuracy, I had to use indirect percussion to get over my inaccuracy in using freehand percussion. So indirect percussion gave me more accuracy. All right. But I was also using the swiping technique in other areas. But the main long flake removals, long thin flakes, when I first started, I couldn't use the swiping technique because I really didn't understand it. My long thin flakes, which is the basic #1 concept in flint knapping, was done with indirect percussion for myself. That's how I was able to do this, to produce the types of points I wanted. All right. Now I am going to explore and become good at the swiping technique, which also has been called bending flake removal or bending flake technique. Now, I'm not sure exactly how accurate that is, or if bending flake refers to something else, but this particular technique with swiping, also called not scratching, but Charles Eaton used a different word. What is another word for scratching? It's in the video. Anyway, I use the word swiping. To prepare a platform for swiping, this is what happens. Yes, you do the same thing. You want to get rid of that delicate area by hitting and come up with the same kind of edge that you normally would, with an area that looks like it can be struck, but you're not striking this area. What you're doing with your percussor is you're utilizing a flat spot on the percussor to attack this protrusion or the edge. Now, I've said before that flint knapping is not really concerned with the very edge. It's because I was focused mainly on this side of the equation. On this side of the equation, we are focused on the edge. All right. Now you zoom in. This is sharp, right? If we zoom into this, this is going to be a sharp area. Now we abrade it to strengthen it, right? But for the swiping technique, you abrade it to reduce friction on the swipe. So you'll see the guys that are very good at this technique, right? They will abrade in this direction. They will abrade in this direction. Okay, like that, to create an area with less friction than you normally would have, which is totally the opposite what you would do with a soft hammer or a antler percussion tool, right? As an example, the same thing applies to a soft hammer stone technique. You want it to grab. You want the edge to grab. But in the swiping technique, you do not want the edge to grab. Now, it's when you're learning it, like when I'm learning it, I'm not doing this well enough in some cases, and it results in stuff like this, where the tool that I'm using is a flat face tool with a lot of force because of the speed, but instead of sliding on the edge, it actually grabs the edge and pulls very hard, and it pulls so hard it's able to crack the biface lengthwise. Okay, now to be fair, this particular piece of raw chert is prone to snapping. All right, the idea that raw stone usually has a lot of strength in bending, so it's rigid, is false, because there are many stones that are high quality that do not have the property of being strong in bending. This one is a prime example. It snapped through the thickest area, the most difficult way to snap. It snapped in the most difficult way possible with very little effort. That is because with this particular raw stone, it does not have strength in bending. Okay, which also leads to this type of snapping. Now it could be because of the way I'm holding it. That's another thing. If I wasn't holding it or anchoring it in this area as well as I was, it may have been able to move a little bit more and not be so rigid to cause this type of snap, right? Same with this. If I had, maybe it was pointed out to me that I'm probably pushing with my thumb and creating bending stresses so that the hit will bend it this way and I'm bending it that way with my thumb, so it's just not a good scenario. But this stone itself is prone to snapping even with extremely careful techniques. And just to demonstrate this, I know that I'm off on a tangent. I'm coming back to this in a minute. I have an artifact. This is a real artifact of this exact same type of stone that I was using in the video. Okay, same type. Now, with this particular type of point, the bases are developed first, and then the blades are thinned. Right, so let's get a width to thickness ratio. This is about 50 millimeters, just to get a thickness on here, by like 8 or 9. It's 8. So that's like 6:1, right? When these are, when these are made, they get down thinner than 6:1 on the blade itself. So you can tell that they did this first, the stem first, and then thin the blade, because it's substantially thicker than the stem. All right. Now, what happened with this particular strike, which I think was probably a swiping strike? Well, if you look carefully, the bulb of percussion is here, in this area, right? It was struck here because there's a bulb of percussion here. But instead of the flake traveling down and terminating on this side, it hinged or reversed itself and terminated on this side. Okay, hit it here, and I've done this in videos. It's like a reverse type of scenario where your detached piece, happens to be the detached piece, ends up being larger than your objective piece. Right? Where your detached piece is supposed to be down here, detached is supposed to be smaller than your objective piece. This is the opposite. So this shows you how brittle this particular material can be, even for the experts back in the day. This is a real artifact. Okay, it's very easy to nap. It's high quality, high grade, and all that, but you get the same issues with the delicacy of this particular type of stone. All right, that was a side note, just so we can be a little clear on the hazards of raw stone. If you're under the impression that raw stone gives you a lot of rigidity to be able to handle this type of flaking or large flakes in general. Okay. It's not true, but it's probably generally true. All right. Let's get back to this swiping technique. So I left off with it being critical that there is no friction, not much friction involved in the strike, because the percussor needs to swipe. It needs to travel. There has to be some amount of travel along the platform or the edge. In this case, the edge is the contact point. So there has to be some travel, so there cannot be a lot of friction, or you'll get catastrophic events like it'll pull too hard or it'll smash the edge or something like that. What you want is for because of the angle that you're hitting, it increases inward pressure as well as the downward as this percussor is moving. And this increase in force, I said pressure, but I should have said force, causes it to snap somewhere along this surface here. Okay? Preferably, it'll snap somewhere where it's advantageous, like within this platform area. But sometimes it'll snap up here and you'll get a bite taken out of your workpiece. If it initiates too high, you'll get a bite taken out. What you want is something that'll initiate down here with a very low, very flat bulb of percussion. Okay. And another thing here with the percussor, let's just say it's a hammerstone and you have a flat area and you're swinging it with your hand and you have your elbow resting on something. There is going to be an arc because you've got a pivot point. But you are going to try to make it as straight as possible as far as the strike goes. So you're going to minimize the arc. Minimize. That's what I've been finding out. Try to minimize the arc. There's always going to be an arc, but try to minimize it. Okay. I got a phone call in the middle of this explanation, as usual. So I got to go. But I'll try to explain this better if it's not clear. One more thing. This might have implications on the Levallois technique, right? This is very similar to what they call a Levallois point, right? Now I've seen people try to imitate these by striking here to remove this flake. That's wrong. What happens is you strike this way with oblique to a ridge. So when the flake fans out from the point of impact, hopefully, you can have two ridges, but hopefully on this one side where there's a pronounced ridge, you'll get a point. And then you just trim off this other side. And it's relatively flat when you do it this way. And the swiping technique can facilitate this type of initiation. So the Levallois technique may have incorporated the swiping in it as well. So I'll explore that too. But if you see someone trying to make one of these what they call Levallois points from striking here along the ridge, it's wrong. It's struck from the side. And probably with a swiping type of maneuver to produce a flat flake, which is also characteristic of the Levallois technique. Okay. All right, I got to go. See you on the next video.